Good evening, and welcome to UAS's Evening at Egan. My name is Angie Steves, and I work at the Chancellor's Office. This annual fall lecture series is free to the general public and streamlined throughout Southeast on youtube.com/UAS Southeast. There are two ways that you can help support this event. One, join the UAS alumni, Friends of the Egan Library. And two, make a donation on the UASAA Friends of Egan Library that we're trying to endow. Membership cards are on each row of the chairs. You can hand them to me at the end of the program. You can find more information online at uas.alaska.edu/Egan Lectures. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Bathrooms are in the back and down the hall. Emergency exits are in the back to your left. And there are 2 parking spaces in the back side of the building, handicap parking spaces. Please remember to silence your phones. There will be time at the end of the program for questions. Please wait for me to hand you the microphone so our friends online can hear your question. And now, please join me in welcoming Sol Neely, who will be introducing tonight's guest speaker. Thank you.
Sio Nagato, Ulihelisti. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see you all. When the Dean, Tom Thornton, sent an email out to a few faculty members announcing that Walter EchoHawk would be speaking at this year's Evening at Egan lecture series, I replied almost immediately with an irrepressible enthusiasm. And in response, Dean Thornton asked if I would introduce Mr. EchoHawk tonight. And I keep telling my friends and family that it's one of the great pleasures of my life to have the opportunity to introduce Mr. EchoHawk. His contributions and legacies in his work in federal Indian law cannot be underestimated, and we owe a great deal to him for all that he has done for Indian country. For my introduction, I would like to first run through Mr. EchoHawk's credentials and accomplishments. Of course, this is an abbreviated account of Mr. EchoHawk's work. For example, I had the good fortune of spending some time with him yesterday, and as we were driving out to the glacier, he told me he undertook a winter tour of all the Alaska prisons in the late 1970s. Wow, that's awesome. But to start, Walter EchoHawk is an author, an attorney, and legal scholar who most recently served as the Dan and Maggie Inouye Distinguished Chair on Democratic Ideals at University of Hawaii's Law School. He is author of Battlefields and Burial Grounds in 1994, In the Courts of the Conqueror from 2010, In the Light of Justice from 2013, and of course, most recently, what he's here to talk about tonight, The Sea of Grass. And we have a few copies of these available in the back. They're $30 a piece, and he'll sign them for you this evening. And I'm halfway through it, and it is a page turner. It is an incredible book. I highly recommend it. As a Pawnee Indian with a BA in political science from Oklahoma State University and a JD from University of New Mexico, Mr. EchoHawk practices law in Oklahoma. He serves as chair of the board of directors for the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. And he is on the Knowledge Givers Advisory Board for Oklahoma's American Indian Cultural Center and Museum. Additionally, as a staff attorney for the Native American Rights Fund from 1973 to 2009, he represented Indian tribes, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians on significant legal issues in the modern era of federal Indian law, a time defined by the rise of modern Indian nations in the tribal sovereignty movement. He has litigated indigenous rights across a wide spectrum of concerns, including religious freedom, prisoner rights, water rights, treaty rights, and reburial and repatriation rights. In his private practice, Mr. EchoHawk has represented various Oklahoma tribes, He has served as a justice on the Supreme Court of the Supreme Courts of the Pawnee Nation and Kickapoo Nation. He has taught federal Indian law at the law schools of Tulsa University, Lewis and Clark, and University of Hawaii. But Mr. EchoHawk is also admitted to practice law before the U.S. Supreme Court, Colorado Supreme Court, Oklahoma Supreme Court, Courts of Appeal for the 8th, 9th, 10th, and District of Columbia circuits, Federal Claims Court, and several U.S. district courts. And allow me just a moment to reference a few highlights from Mr. EchoHawk's legal career. From 1986 to 1990, he represented tribal clients to obtain repatriation legislation, which include precedent-setting legislation in Nebraska and Kansas, directing museums to return and rebury dead bodies and grave objects to their tribes of origin. The 1989 reburial agreement with the Smithsonian Institution enacted into the National Museum of the American Indian Act. And the 1986 to 1990 legislative campaign culminating in the passage of NAGPRA, the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. From 1990 to 1994, he represented the Native American Church of North America to obtain passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act amendments of 1994. And in 2010, he represented the Klamath tribes in a trial to quantify treaty-protected Indian water rights for hunting, fishing, and gathering purposes, and various Tlingit tribes to repatriate sacred objects and cultural patrimony. These are a few highlights from a prestigious, efficacious, and consequential career in the service of Indigenous sovereignty and justice, a career that has affected everyone in Indian country. But there's also a pedagogical dimension to Mr. EchoHawk's work that cannot be undervalued in light of his concrete legal accomplishments. In my own classroom, and I know for certain in Dr. Twitchell's classrooms as well, Mr. EchoHawk's work provides a foundational understanding to the history of federal Indian law that so many Americans lack. It is absolutely essential that more Americans learn this history. And to that end, when I teach Native American literature, the first thing I have my students read is the first 3 chapters from In the Courts of the Conqueror. At his talk yesterday afternoon at Sealaska, which will be made available within a couple days on Sealaska YouTube page, and we do encourage you to subscribe to that page, Mr. EchoHawk drew a bit from the book by not only referencing a couple of those cases, but also reiterating the claim that we must not confuse law and justice. The Trail of Tears in the U.S. was legal. Jim Crow apartheid in the U.S. was legal. The genocidal violence of Germany during World War II was legal. Boarding and residential school violence in North America was legal. By helping us understand, navigate, and prepare for the new era of federal Indian law in the U.S., Mr. EchoHawk intervenes concretely, not only in our statutory frameworks, but also in our political imaginations, a point best exemplified by his new book, which he is here to talk about tonight, Sea of Grass. It's an historical fiction novel inspired by the oral tradition from 10 generations of Mr. EchoHawk's family. The book tells the stories of the spiritual side of Native life, and it gives voice to the rich culture and cosmology of the Pawnee Nation. So please join me in welcoming this beloved Indigenous advocate who is as humble as he is fierce.
Wow, that was a wonderful introduction. I paid him to say all of that. Thank you, Professor Neely. I appreciate those wonderful remarks, and thank each and every one of you for coming tonight. Gosh, I hope I don't mess up this computer here. Move it up here. I want to, can everyone hear me back there? More volume? There, how's that? Better? Better? Okay, thank you. Yes, well, good evening to everyone. And thanks again, Professor Neely, for your wonderful introduction and also for your hospitality. Yesterday, showed me around town, and we just had a wonderful time yesterday afternoon. Also, I appreciate Dr. Thornton, Dean Thornton. Is the Dean here this evening? Oh, Dean, okay. Yes, sir, for the invitation to come to this wonderful, wonderful campus here in the Egan Library to also be a part of this lecture series. I thank you very much. I appreciate this invitation as well as your help getting here. I want to thank my good friend Dr. Rosita Whirl from Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, as well as Chuck Smythe. Chuck, there you are, Chuck. For co-sponsoring this event as well. You know, I appreciate that. And again, to each of you for braving the evening and being here tonight. I am honored to be a part of this lecture series. It's a big thrill to me. It's always a thrill to me to come to Southeast Alaska. Juneau, of course, is located in one of the most awesome places on the planet. And, of course, the Tungus rainforest is the ancient homeland of the great and proud Tlingit Nation, who has resided in these islands, you know, for over 10,000 years, you know, and over that great span of time, the iconic Tlingit people have evolved one of North America's most profound indigenous cultures in North America. And, you know, to the elders that are here, Bob, you know, and your people, you know, I say thank you, you know, for my privilege, you know, to be here in your homeland, a guest, you know, in your awesome homeland here. Your proud history, your stewardship, you know, of this rainforest, your flourishing culture of the Tlingit people, you know, are an inspiration, you know, to all of our native tribes here, and also your culture, you know, is a national treasure, you know, to the United States of America as well. So I want to dedicate my remarks, you know, to the Tlingit Nation here this evening, if I may. What I'd like to do this evening is to briefly describe my book here, The Sea of Grass. Secondly, I'd like to tell you why I wrote this book, and third, how I wrote it. Fourth, I'm going to read a couple selected passages for you, and then I'm sure we'll have time for questions and answers, and then Dr. Neely and I are going to sell some books here at the end of the program here, sell and sign a few books. I only have a limited number that are with us, but the book is also on Amazon.com. You know, if we don't have enough, why, please feel welcome to go to Amazon.com as well. So I just, this is the book, The Sea of Grass, a family tale from the American heartland. And I want to describe the book briefly for you. How do I get to the map? I'm very low tech here. I don't know how to. Okay. The story in this book takes place here in the Great Plains of North America. And I prepared a map, which is in the book here. It's called Tita Whuts World. Tita Whut is a Pawnee name for the Great Spirit. And this map is an indigenous map that I prepared of the Central Plains of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, parts of South Dakota. This is the Aboriginal Pawnee homeland. It's a very vast domain, 600 miles by 600 miles. That I prepared here. This is the setting for this story here. And it was prepared by myself with the help of the Nebraska State archaeologist. And I want to spend a little time talking about this map because it lays out the cosmology and the origin story of the Pawnee Nation in the Central Plains. And a big part of our environment there are the heavens above. You know, at the nighttime, on the vast expanse of the sea of grass, the starry heavens that are always before us is a huge part of the landscape. And so this map begins with the beginning of the world from the river of many potatoes there, which is the Loop River, but in our name it's Itzkahari, and that means many potatoes river. You can see these big stars from that point, that latitude and longitude. And in the northwest is the big black star, Upidit Gatit Dadihudu. And in the beginning of time, the great the spirit Tita, he began by creating the star nation because the universe at that time was an utterly black void. The expanse of the heavens, but it was a holy place because it was the home of the Great Spirit. And there came a time when Tita decided to create the world, and he began with the star nation. And he called the stars together, and he placed them, after creating them by thought alone, he placed them in the heavens. And in the northwest, the big black star to hold up the vault of the heavens in the northwest. He gave to this star, whose feet touches the earth and hands touches the vault of the heavens, the power to allow animals and plants to communicate with human beings. And then in the east, he created the mighty star, the big star, the morning star, Hupidit Kutsu, mighty star, a warrior star who rises in the east each morning, driving the rest of the stars before them. In the southeast, he told the red star to hold up that part of the heavens, Upidit Pahut. This star controls animal behavior as well as the rising sun. To the south, Upidit Kutsu is our spirit star, who is below the southern horizon. This star oversees the spirit world, the land of the dead, where the Pawnees go. It is said that when a Pawnee passes away, that their spirit is taken to a certain star next to the Milky Way, which we call the Spirit Trail. And it cuts the sky in the middle. On the east, the Great Spirit put the male stars, a village of the male stars, and on the west are female stars. And so the spirit, this one star, I can't tell you it's his name because it's too sacred to be told, but receives the spirits and places them on the Milky Way. And the north wind blows the spirits down below the southern horizon. So in our pipe ceremonies, we always we offer smoke to our ancestors there that reside under the leadership of the spirit star. Then into the southwest, this is moving to the female side of the heavens. There is the white star, Chupidit Taka. She holds up that vault of the heavens, and she's the mate. The Great Spirit performed a marriage at that time, and her mate is the big black star. To the west is the evening star, the mother of all things. She was given at the time of creation a garden in the heavens where our mother corn and all of our sacred foods are grown. And she had four helpers, the thunders, the lightnings, the clouds, and the rains that turned into old men during the creation, helped her create. She was given a role in the creation of the world. Up into the northwest is the yellow star woman, Chupidit Karakata. She is the yellow star woman who controls the setting sun. And then to the north up here is the Kakadawadi, the chief star. Is a star that does not move. It's the North Star, and he sort of looks over the other stars as the chief in the heavens above. And we were told in the creation story of our people that we were created in the heavens by the stars, that the evening star and the morning star, they converged in the heavens. The morning star traveled through the firmament and overcame many difficulties and mated with the evening star. And if you see during the course of the year that these two stars over a 12-month cycle, they'll rise like that, and then they'll circle each other, and then they'll separate like that. And so that was seen as this convergence of these two stars, creating the first Pawnee, Adam and Eve, or in this case it was the first woman, and her name was Chudiki, which means standing rain. And then the sun and moon did the same thing, creating the first male, and his name was Pitaski, which is a closed person. The Great Spirit then put the first woman on a kind of like a whirlwind, and it touched the ground right next to the Holy River there, which is the Missouri River. On the west bank is where she was placed at a spot near Nemaha, Nebraska. And then the first male child was brought to earth in the same way, So we say that we are the children of the stars, and on death, we go back into the heavens up there. They are the ones, our Adam and Eve, that peopled this region. And over time, they established villages on all of these main rivers that traverse and go across the Central Plains there. I put the Pawnee names in English on all of these major streams here, but you got the Loop River of many potatoes. The Broad River is the Platte River. Then you go to Waterfowl by Buffalo, which is the Republican River. That's basically, it runs along the border of Kansas and Nebraska. In the spring, on the bank of the river below that is the Solomon River, a very beautiful river, prairie with mesa lands, there grasslands. Down to the Big Black Forest River that goes into the near Salina, Kansas. Down further, the river that comes from the mountains is the Arkansas River, and then Salt River running is the Cimarron River. Down here at the bottom, at the confluence of these two streams, is the current Pawnee Indian Reservation in Oklahoma, where I live, right on the banks of the Salt River running there. This map also has our holy places depicted on it that dot this vast Aboriginal homeland. All of these stars that are placed on this map are Pawnee names for different holy places where the spirits of the Great Plains animals abide deep in the navel of Mother Earth. Everything from the spirit of God's bird, the eagle, all of the other birds, the buffalo, Father Wolf, Father Coyote, all of the animals, their spirits live in these different places, and they're normally put beside, they overseed or overlook and intercede for the Pawnee people in this region. And they're places, pilgrimage places, vision questing sites for the Pawnee Nation. Also on this map where the story takes place are the principal village sites. They're numbered in different places that are discussed in this book. So this is where the story takes place in the Sea of Grass. It's my story of the EchoHawk family, of which I am a member, as well as the accompanying history of the Pawnee Nation. And this book, it chronicles the lives and times of 127 of my relatives who lived from the 1790s down to the present day. It traces 10 generations of my family. When I was writing this book, it was really 9 generations, but before, as it was the manuscript was being finalized, I had my first great-grandson was born, so that makes 10. These 127 people, they're in an appendix in the back of the book in the order that they appear. But these are real people who are indigenous to this region, whose lives were shaped by this land, the animals and plants, in the greatest grassland on earth, that spans all the way down. It's way down here and from the Rio Grande all the way up into Canada. And so the story takes place then in a real place. All of the major events that are discussed in this book really happened. But since I was not alive in the time in question for many of these generations, I was know 3 generations that preceded me and 3 that have followed me. But I wasn't alive in the earlier generations, and therefore I had to pull from my imagination dialogue and a few, not many, but a few minor characters from this book. So technically, from an American literature standpoint, it's the genre is a historical fiction. And this novel, as we go through, we chronicle these 10 generations that inhabit the Central Plains here. The novel tells a kind of a rare story in American literature because it's a story about the Pawnee people that was actually written by a Pawnee, actually told by a Pawnee, and not by a non-Indian writer, which had been basically what had took place in the past. And so I tried to give a more authentic, multi-dimensional tribal voice, to this family history, and therefore I think provide a kind of a more rare insight into our history and our culture that you could find in many of the writings about the Pawnee people that are out there. And as Roger Welch, the Nebraska folklorist, says in some of the book blurbs here, he describes this book as kind of a history told as a novel. And he asserts that that's the way you should tell the history of a people. So, why did I write this book? As Saul has mentioned, most of my writings pertain to the law, federal Indian law. And this was my first departure from that to write a historical novel with dialogue. And so it was a big challenge for me to do that. But I had 2 reasons that motivated me to try my hand at this. And the first being, I was inspired, deeply inspired by Alex Haley's Roots. You'll recall that he had a very powerful story to tell about his family history, you know, the institution of slavery and the troubling aftermath of slavery, you know, with segregation and racial discrimination, poverty, and their rise from that slavery and its aftermath. And he, in his book, which came out in the 70s, as I recall, he traced 7 generations of his family back to Africa. And the story he had to tell, it captivated the reading public. You know, I think he got a Pulitzer Prize. It became a mini-series on TV, and it really it offered a brand new vista for Black America, the idea that their ancestry wasn't artificially cut off, you know, by the institution of slavery, but that with research you could go on and, you know, all the way back to Africa, you know. And so a very, very profound book, you know, that he wrote, you know, in the book Roots, you know. And so I realized that I could do 10 generations of my family in this part of the world, and our stories are just as powerful as his, so why can't I write a book like that? So I thought, so I did. A very similar kind of book using a similar kind of a methodology. So it's kind of a Native American version of Roots. And I wrote it in the first instance for EchoHawk family members, especially our children, our young people, so they might know who they are and where they came from, and you know, not get lost, you know, in the modern world that we live in. But it's also for all readers, written for all readers as well, who like a story that I think is well told, especially students of Native American studies, students of American history, contemporary Native American literature, American history as well. And the book hopes to inspire the readers to research your families and tell the powerful stories of your ancestors as well, because there's a great truth out there, and that is all of us, no matter what race or culture or where we live, but every one of us in this room here, we all have roots that extend far back into time, and we all have ancestors that had very, very powerful stories to tell, you know, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude, you know, because we're here today only because they survived the challenges of their day. They had the resilience to surmount and overcome whatever challenges that they had, and that's the reason that they survived. That's the reason we're here today. So we owe them not only our very lives, but also they gave us a wonderful gift, you know, our legacy of our cultures and our own histories, so any of us in this room here could do the same thing as, you know, to write a book of this nature. It just takes some research, I guess, and so that was the first. I think the thing that inspired me was the fact that Alex Haley was able to do that. It took him 15 years to do that, because I guess he was starting from scratch, you know, and trying to research his genealogy, you know. I already had that information. I already knew the history of my people, you know, and so, and I already had been to most of these places on this map, you know, in my lifetime. So it only took me 3 years to pull that together here. But I also had a second reason that motivated me to write this book. As a Native American person, a member of the Pawnee tribe, and also an attorney that has spent a lot of my adult career, you know, since 1973, representing Native people across the country. I believe that there is a need for Native Americans to tell our own stories, to reclaim our own histories, and to write our own histories. Because as things stand today, our native people are largely invisible. We're forgotten in most of the history books. We tend to be left out of history. I guess there's that adage that the conquerors get to write the history. And so today, in most places, there's a big information gap out there in the United States, about Native America. The fact of the matter is very little is known by most Americans about Native peoples, our histories, our problems, our aspirations, our contemporary issues. They're all, pretty much ignored by the mainstream media in most places, certainly in our school books in most places as well, so that most Americans see us only as stereotypes. The Pawnee people are an example. You can look at the book Little Big Man and the movie Little Big Man, with Dustin Hoffman. Dances with Wolves, the more recent movie The Revenant, Lonesome Dove, these books and novels, and see that the Pawnees appear in these writings and these movies, only as a one-dimensional figure, that very, very kind of misleading characters, that are not really real, and so. So it's kind of a scary situation for Native people to be in, the fact that our neighbors know almost nothing about us, that we're invisible peoples in our own homeland here. So it's a situation in the social discourse of only the voices of a few against the ignorance of many. And that can be a somewhat sensitive, almost dangerous situation from a human rights standpoint when that kind of ignorance finds its way into the machinery of government, So there's that need out there for Native people to find their own voice and tell our own stories, And so this book represents my effort as just one individual to actually do that, to try to give a Pawnee voice to our own history, and to try to humanize the Pawnee people and see our history through our own eyes, And so that's the reasons why I wrote this book. How did I write it? And I would encourage, I want to spend a little time on this, because each of you, if I can do this, I'm not a professional historian, or a genealogist, but if I can write a book of this nature, you guys can do the same thing, and I'm sure your stories. And in this Southeast Alaska is a land of many stories, many profound stories, And I think so. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, at least, on how I did it, because I think each of us, if we were to research our families, we would all be under different circumstances and maybe a different starting place in our research, I know, like the Native Hawaiians, for example, I was bragging about when I was teaching law in Honolulu, I'm writing a book, 10 generations of my family. I said, first guy I said, well, he said, I can do 25 generations. I said, oh, okay. And I couldn't learn this. Next time I mentioned it to one of the old aunties there, and she says, I can do 100. But they remember their generations through chants that they sing out there, And if you go to Qatar, I was in Doha, Qatar, the young college students, they can trace all the way back to Muhammad, But so we all have different starting points. Some people can't go past their parents or grandparents, And we all have different starting points if we were to research our family. But what I found in terms of researching my own family collecting the data and analyzing it, I think you have to investigate 3 areas. As a writer, if you're going to set out to write a book of this nature, or just some sort of a written writing about it. The first is the people. Who are your ancestors? And then you have to say, okay, so how am I going to, what sources am I going to consult to find out who my ancestors were? I myself, when I was young, I had an interest, I wanted to know who all my relatives were, and I'm still learning. I'm age 71 today, and there's still ancestors, relatives I have out there. I'm still learning. But I banked real hard on the oral traditions of the EchoHawk family. Though my father died young, I was very blessed to have 7 or 8 uncles and 4 or 5 aunts, that were kind of stepped in. I had many fathers as a young person. And they were all wonderful, wonderful storytellers. At all of our family gatherings, they would just sit down and they would trade stories, and it was just engrossing to listen to them talk. And I'm very thankful to many of them that took time out, some quality time to spend time with me as a young person. I wish I would have took notes and made a recording of what they were talking about, but that was my principal source. And then, and among, especially, I had one uncle that when I was practicing law in Colorado, he came up from Pawnee, Oklahoma, and spent about 4 months with me. And I had a family tree maker program in my computer, where you start with yourself, parents and grandparents, and all that's in your computer. Every night after work, we would go in there and we would fill it out. And he knew each and every member of the EchoHawk family that was alive in the 20th century, and all about them. Their nicknames, where they went to school, and what if they were veterans, and what branch of service. They had all kinds of stories. And then the second big source, third big source was my brother Roger EchoHawk, who's a professional historian. He actually did interview our family elders back in the 70s. And he had a recorder. He's one of the few that I know that recorded them and wrote that stuff down. And then he followed it up with historical research in government archives. So those were my principal sources of finding out who my ancestors were. And the database I used to organize that information was in this Family Tree Maker computer program. You can input as much data and even photographs and whatnot into your computer, So I have over 1,000, ancestors on my family tree. 127 of them are talked about in this book. The second thing that you need to research is the places where they lived. Where did your ancestors live? In my case, this is where they lived. And just like Alex Haley went all the way to Africa to the village of his ancestors' birth, I think you actually, if you're really researching your roots, you gotta go there. You gotta go to the land where your ancestors lived and walked this earth and died, I think it gives you a lot of meaning in your research to actually see where they lived, And then the database I used is basically maps, maps. The third thing that I think has to be researched here is events. What happened to your ancestors? What shaped their lives? Again, for me, I mainly consulted the oral traditions of the EchoHawk family and the traditions of the Pawnee people. Through all of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, other elders and other families, during the course of my days with some of our tribal singers, our elders, our traditional peoples. Lots of stories out there. A lot of our history is bound up in our Pawnee songs. We have all kinds of songs that talk about the history of our people, you know, different ceremonial songs, different kind of dances that we have, ghost dance, and they all have record our history. Then we have also many of our traditions were recorded at the turn of the century, in the turn of into the early 1900s, by anthropologists who collected a lot of myths and stories and traditions of the Pawnee. So we're very fortunate that we've got a lot of books out there with hundreds of our stories that were recorded, oral traditions that were recorded. And then I supplemented those sources with historical research and of my own that I conducted. Journals of explorers into the Sea of Grass, other sources of history. And how I organized that data, I just took a big artist notebook about that big, you know, and I started with the year 1790, 91, 92, 93, all the way down to about 1930. And out to the side of each year, I put in 2 or 3 of the major historical events that happened during that year. And so with that information, and also knowing where my ancestral was able to trace my ancestors, I could overlay the history of that and see where my people lived over the course of history from the 1790s down to the present, living in these different villages here that are in this little table there. So that's kind of the methodology that I followed in my instance. And then I just had to sit down and write it up. And as I say, it took me about 3 years to pull the research together and write this story. And I kind of followed the same methodology as Alex Haley. In Roots was my model. I sprinkled a little magic onto these pages that I pulled from the spiritual side of Pawnee life, from our cosmology and from our ceremonies and our stories, you know, that talk about our relationship with animals and plants. There you have it. You know, that was the book. So I want to move at this point to reading a couple passages from this book. It has 4 parts in it. The first part, and each part has its own narrator. One of my ancestors, you know, would narrate it. But the first part, the first 15 or 16, 17 chapters, from the 1790s to about 1864, is narrated by my triple great-grandmother. Her name was Tita, which means calico cloth woman. And we belong to the Kitcahawk band of the Pawnee Nation. Pawnee Nation has 4 bands. The Kitcahawk, which is my band. It's a little Earth Lodge village. You have the Chawee band, begging for meat people. Pitahawirat, this is man going downstream or east band. And then the Skidee band, Wolf people that lived to the north there a little bit. Then we had relatives on the that are north to us when the world was young, was the Arikara people that currently live in North Dakota. Astadahe is our name for them, frozen feet people, because it's really cold up there. And then to our south, we have relatives called the Kitikuruks, which is bear eyes people. They're the Wichita Indians that live today in the Wichita Mountains of southwest Oklahoma. But anyway, so my triple great grandmother, she narrates what I want to read here. She, as I say, she was born in the 1790s, passed away in 1864. Calico cloth woman. Her mother was a captive. All our family tradition says she was. Her mother was a captive. And we don't by captive we don't know. In that time period, there weren't many white people in this area, so it was probably a Comanche because we were always raiding the Comanches. So I'm presuming for purposes of this book that her mother was a Comanche. Her father was a Kitkahaki a warrior who belonged to our Sakipiti Idu, which is a young dog dance society that we still have today. She was a survivor. In her lifetime, she saw smallpox, she saw warfare, she saw famine, she saw freedom as we roamed this vast region on the Buffalo Road. We were a Buffalo Nation. And she would have been about 10 years old living on waterfowl by buffalo here. Kiradutu, in that number 1 village there, which is depicted, I call it Chiitu's village, or Calico Cloth Woman's village. She would have been about 10 years old when the first American dragoons entered this region here, Zebulon Pike, in 1806, I believe it was, to explore this region here. And he camped, the dragoons camped 2 weeks among our people there. But she married a man by the name of Closing In, a warrior. And by then they were living on that village number 2 up on the River of Many Potatoes, is Horse Creek. It was a large, 10,000 people lived there. 3 of the Pawnee bands, the Kitkahaki, the Chawi, Pitahawi, had all lived in one giant village there at Horse Creek on the village site number 2 up there, right next door to village site number 3, which was the Skeety or Wolf People village. So that's where they married. She, in her lifetime, and her husband were the parents of 7 sons that lived into adulthood. They later became known as the 7 brothers. And then they had 1 daughter that we know of, and her name was Yellow Star, after that Yellow Star woman up there. But she was a matriarch, and we had a matriarchal society there. And anyway, she narrates this first part of the book of the course of her days of her life. And we in the 1830s, we experienced smallpox. About 3 waves of it came through that River of Many Potatoes, during that decade. And for some reason, all of her family survived that decade when our tribe was decimated. It was cut probably in about half. Families went extinct or were decimated. But for some reason, they survived. I don't know how they did that, so I had to, my research indicated that some of these villagers, they scattered into the plains to get away from this plague. And so I'm surmising that even though she was born on a river waterfowl by buffalo down there on village site 1, they were living on village site 2 up there, that she fled. In the book, the way I explain how they survived that decade, they flee. She has a vision, a dream, a night dream, kasaru, which where the different spirits that protect her, came to her in the night and said, "Flee, smallpox is coming. Take your family. Go back down to the river of the village of your birth." It's about maybe 100 miles. And live out the smallpox years. And then when the smallpox is gone, you can return to the people. So I have a chapter in this book called Smallpox, and I'll read you an excerpt. This is in her words. When I wrote this, I had to get in touch with my feminine side. And once you do that, there's no turning back, guys. My husband peered through the grass. Pahitu, keep silent, he whispered. Riders are approaching. We hid in a ravine. They're Pawnees, he noted, probably returning from Kirikurukstu, Wichita country. But we took cover anyway. Better to steer clear of humans. By hiding, we avoided a brush with death, for unbeknownst to us, these riders were infected. Dacha Kidaru, smallpox, rode with them. Some say it was brought by a mysterious man sent by the South Star. But in this instance, we believe that traders brought smallpox to the prairie. The mule skinners hated Pawnees so much they put Dacha Kidaru in a bottle. They poured the deadly pus onto blankets, then traded them to these men. Either way it happened, the infected men were as good as dead. The shimmering figures rode north, barely visible in a hot summer mirage. We crossed paths like ghosts passing in the night. Ride, said female gleam passes. This female gleam passes Chawada Hut. That's her name. She's a corn spirit, a kernel of corn that is protecting Chiitu. Ride, said female gleam passes. Don't look back. We were on the run, refugees once again. Only this time we fled to the valley of my birth. They're heading down here to the water fouled by buffalo. The reason it got that name is because the great herds inhabited that area and always crossing and crisscrossing that stream. I wondered about the life we left behind. I wondered what lay ahead, and I wondered, who can we run to? Who can I trust with my family if I need to? Yes, who? Wonder I did. I trusted my husband and knew we could depend on him, but it takes many to feed a household. We were short-handed, just 2 adults and some kids. Yellow Star and Crazy Horse were young but able, but the little ones still ran naked or nursed at my breast. To make matters worse, it was too late to plant a big garden. Aka, my worries were many, but choices few. Why did we flee? Dachakidaru means suspended in water. It refers to blisters that rot the face. I was 5 winters old when blisters killed my dear mother. They swelled her face into a pimply mass of flesh barely recognizable as human. They were so numerous that they formed one giant oozing sore. Those unstoppable blisters brought hysteria and despair to my mother before she died. Many folks died during that time, and those who lived saw their blisters dry into scabs, which scarred them for life. I didn't get the blisters that time, but I carry the scars inside. Rotting face is a stranger that stalks the prairie. It killed before. Now blisters are coming again, this time from a bottle. My dream said, flee while you still can. We obeyed. A risky path is better than facing smallpox, so we ran and hoped for the best. Ride on, I thought, just keep on riding. Now, blistering heat beat down onto the land from a merciless sun. We journeyed on and on through the trackless hills without a single shrub or tree anywhere in sight. At length, the blue hills of the Republican came into view. They're entering the waterfowl by Buffalo Valley there. Finally, we crested a high ridge, and from the vista, our dusty troop gazed into the valley. It looked like an oasis. Sparkling water snaked through a dark green carpet of tall grass. Trees crowded close to the riverbanks. The land was quiet. We were the only humans in 100 miles. We heard only the wind caressing the prairie and the gurgle of bubbling water. Our thirsty horses were eager to reach the water, so we guided them down into the lush pastures, undisturbed by man for many years. With tongues thick from thirst, we advanced through a shady grove to reach the life-giving stream, then splashed through the water, home at last. From all appearances, the unsullied valley looked fresh and new, like it was in the beginning when Tita first put life into the land. After the Kitcahawkie left 20 winters ago, the valley regained the purity it once possessed, and Mother Earth began life anew with all her powers intact. To us, it was a marvelous sight. Aha, I thought, this is what Standing Rain saw when the world was new. I'm not Standing Rain, but if nature can recover and begin anew, I figured we can too. Our weary group passed through the ruins of the old village and made our way to Pahuru. That's that animal lodge there, hill that points the way. We remembered a secluded box canyon near the animal lodge on the Holy Hill. It might offer a good hideaway, said closing in, with a natural corral and water. Sure enough, a thick stand of timber guarded the mouth of the canyon. Once inside the narrow entrance, it opened into a nice pasture. A spring bubbled right out of the ground from Pahuru. I could plant a fine garden beside the cool water, so our long journey ended here at the center of the world. We unpacked the horses and pitched camp. First, I introduced myself to the trees that guarded the mouth of the canyon. Then I anxiously inspected the surrounding land to see what grows. I found it offered hope of renewal. Choke cherries and wild plums lined the riverbanks. Berry patches boasted buffalo berries, raspberries, strawberries, ground plums, currants, ground cherries, and riverbank grapes. Mainstay food included Indian potatoes, prairie turnips, ground beans, cattail and bulrush shoots, sunflower seeds, and green mint. Oh, it was a gatherer's paradise. If we could gather enough for winter, life would be good in the Great Spirit's garden. That's how Standing Rain and Clothes Person survived when the world was new, and so would we. To enrich the larder, I would plant a late garden. And that's not all. The valley was teeming with animals. Pahuru drew them back in great abundance after the Kitcahawkie left. This is really their home. We're only visitors. And my hunter can feed us without going far. And I would hunt too, for a she-wolf feeds her family. Therefore, a huntress I became. The valley once supported 2,000 people. Surely it would see us through the smallpox years. I breathed easy for the first time in many sleeps. We were no longer refugees. And on that first day, my thankful husband raised our newborn son up to the sky and offered his prayer. Tita, here we shall live out the dark times and make a fresh start. So that's from this chapter entitled Smallpox. I'm running a little bit late at this point, but if you'll bear with me, I have a shorter section I wanted to read to end off in this book lecture. This is from EchoHawk, who is on the cover of this book. His portrait is in the book, and the painting was done by my son, Bunky EchoHawk, who's a working artist. But EchoHawk was the grandson of a calico cloth woman who was born. He was born in 1854. He lived all the way to 1924. Passed away about 68 or 69 years old. He was my great-grandfather, the patriarch of the modern-day EchoHawk family. There's probably about 200 probably more than 200 EchoHawks with that last name EchoHawk. Another 200 with other close relatives, that don't have that last name. But he saw many changes during the course of his 70 years here on Earth. He saw the Buffalo Road many times. We would follow the buffalo 6 months out of the year. 3 months on our summer hunt where the entire tribe would leave and follow the great herd. And then 3 months in the wintertime as well, And so he went on many of those hunts. He saw warfare with other tribes. He became a Pawnee scout in the U.S. Army during the zenith of the Indian Wars. In fact, that's where our last name came from. He saw our Trail of Tears, I guess you could say, from that village number 6 up there, down here to the Pawnee Reservation on the southern boundaries of our range. He was on that. He saw the ghost dance days on our reservation. He saw the turn of the century. He saw World War I and finally moved into a house, a wooden house, by the age of a couple years before he passed away. But anyway, I want to take you to, he's narrating this part of the book, take you to the year 1868. He's 14 years old. One of his uncles, his name is Mouth Waving in Water, an Indian doctor, a friend of the family, and one of his uncles on his mother's side of the family. By then, his grandmother, Tita, has passed away, but she comes to this Mouth Waving in Water in a night dream, Kasaru, and tells Mouth Waving in Water, "Take pity on my grandson. It's time for him to receive his vision." And she asked him in this dream to take his name at that time was Young Buffalo Calf, and to take him down to the village to that hill that points the way down there on the water that fouled by buffalo, to go on a vision quest. So just those two, they go on a pilgrimage. It's about, like I say, 80 or 90 miles. In the year 1868, and he does have his vision. He receives a new name from Mouth Waving in Water, which is leader of the group. That's based on his vision that he had. And then they journey home, and here's what happens. I'm reading to you from chapter 18 of the book. Take a drink of water. We journeyed home, just Mouth Waving in Water and I. This is EchoHawk speaking. Our path followed the ridge line of a land bridge through the endless hills. At length, we set up camp at the base of our ridge. Before sundown, we hobbled the horses on the grassy floor of a small canyon, then built a brush arbor, a brush lean-to. Uncle made a little fire with buffalo chips, and we drank the last of our coffee. The night wind began to blow. It blew and blew and blew some more. Soon, we found ourselves in a great thunderstorm. As the thunder boomed across the sky, rain pounded the canyon, and our little sanctuary became a roaring stream. So we abandoned camp during the storm. The frightened horses escaped into the night. We trudged to high ground to tough it out and sat on the ridge, shivering and soaking wet. There we huddled in the driving rain for the rest of the night with what little gear we could carry while bolts of lightning struck the ground. Waving in water explained, on black rainy nights, Man Chief, the great skeety chief in your grandmother's day, would climb a hill in the thunder and lightning. He understood that goodness comes from the heavens, so he picked that time to pray for his people. And here's a song he made for the storm. And he sings this storm, this Man Chief's song. It's about the storm, and it basically says, I'm walking to and fro or back and forth. The heavens are speaking. As I place my faith in heaven, that's all I know. The heavens are speaking. I'm going to sing that song for you. Do ta do da wede ku do ta do da wede ku do ta do da wede ku a ti de wa walk ti ku idi sta kita we away. Rihuksu te tetska wait to see kita wait ti de wa hake a ti de wa walk ti ku idi sta kita we. Do ta do ra ware ku do ta do ra ware ku do ta do da ware ku a ti de wa walk ti ku idi sta kita we oh hey. Rihuksu te tetska wait to see kita we ti de wa hake a ti de wa walk ti ku idi sta kita we. The song calmed the sky. It brought an end to the driving rain, but at dawn, the sky turned eerie green. More black clouds started marching our way, and the wind began to gust once again. In the blackness, we noticed a darit-utu, tornado, dancing in the clouds. Its finger touched the earth, and we beheld the power of God coming our way. Nephew, the tornado is coming, hollered Uncle Mouth. Don't be afraid, he said. Old folks say the sky is sacred. We've never been harmed by tornadoes. By then, the cyclone was roaring louder than a locomotive. The fury of the shrieking wind kicked up a great cloud of dust, flying grass and tumbleweeds. Raging wind howled in our ears. Uncle grabbed his pipe and shouted above the roar, "Take cover. I'm going to do something I learned in the medicine lodge." I ran downhill and dived into a buffalo wallow. As I clutched the shrubs around me, Uncle Mouth arose and stood facing the tornado, holding his pipe. As the frightening visage came over the rise, he walked straight into the tornado, the twister, and disappeared before my eyes. In that instant, the great tornado split in two. The big howling twister became two harmless whirlwinds. The little dust devils tiptoed around us, then dissipated like wisps in the breeze. Uncle returned. Aka, he was kewariku, completely naked. All his clothes were lost in the storm, but he still held his pipe, the one called Beloved by Heaven. Now you see the power of this pipe, he said. It's blessed by heaven. And after that awesome incident, I saw a mouth waving in water in a brand new light. For I knew he was no ordinary man. He was Waruksti, holy. And I could never look upon my Rai uncle in the same way ever again. And needless to say, I became a firm believer in the pipe. Thank you. So that concludes my remarks. And I did overrun some time, Saul, so I don't know how we should work this, but I guess are we able to have a few questions or comments or questions? If so, I'm most happy to. We have my sister here's got a microphone, and if there's anyone that has a comment or a question. Over here. As I said last night, it's got to be an easy question, though.
It's a legal question.
Oh, no.
Hello. My name is Kadashan. I am Ichit Chihit Ganachade from the Taku Kwan. And when I speak for my people. Yana Gutierrez, Walking Raven, Alex Stevens. Klush Gustin, my mother, Margaret Stevens. Her father, Gut Shai of the Yanyedi, Sandy Stevens. His bride, Sadie Nakla, Bertha Marshall. Her father, Jack Marshall, Shu Klach. His sister, Daklahach, Susie Shorty Gudinas. My namesake, Chief Kadashan from Wrangell. My great uncle, Ana Klahash, one of the last great chiefs of the Taku. These are my people. But my question is, excuse me, do you have experiences where the state has come in and stolen tribal members from their family?
Are you referring to children or?
Yes.
Well, I haven't personally got involved in Child Welfare Act issues, but I'm familiar with that whole set of problems.
The reason I ask is because my own son, who has Down syndrome, was taken by the state. And I believe the judge violated federal law, taking a tribal citizen from his family. And everybody after that fact is culpable in the crime, and many others.
I too have a son with Down syndrome, so I know
right.
what you're talking about. I'm not all that familiar with the legal status of ICWA here in the state of Alaska on the jurisdictional part, but that applies with, I would say for one thing, get an attorney. And,
I can't afford one, so I became one.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. No, I would challenge to sever parental rights, like, by the state, is certainly a widespread problem in years past. I think the Indian Child Welfare Act determining parental rights is usually determined by tribal courts, at least in the lower 48. But I'm not exactly sure how that applies up here. So I can't really advise you other than to say, get a good attorney. Try the Native American Rights Fund in Anchorage.
I have 3 attorneys so far.
Oh, okay. All right.
But where can I get your book?
We have them in the back as soon as we're done with Q&As.
Signed?
I just wanted to say on the book part, but I wish you the very best in your effort there, on your family member. Just to say that this book is just one sample or one example of what any of you could do as far as your family histories are concerned. And even though I'm a long ways from home, way up here in the most awesome place on the planet, you know, this book still, I think, is relevant to each of us because we all have ancestors that we can write about, you know. So
my name is Henry Stevens. I belong to the same Douglas Inn Association as the man that last spoke. And I have in my hand a time when there was a Douglas Indian village. The white man burned it down in 1962. That's against the Constitution of the United States. It's in violation. The Constitution is interrupted by federal case law. And this Congress with plenary authority over Indian affairs. Now, in all the United States, there's 15 people. Has the only, I'm sorry, I started over. I'll read it. The Constitution is interrupted by federal law and vests Congress with plenary authority over Indian affairs. They're the only group in the United States that can say anything about Indian affairs. Douglas Village was condemned by the City Council of Douglas and state law. Another violation of the Constitution. Like I say, this law says only they can. I have everything I say, I have. And this is real. The one thing, the courts never used it because Indians don't know anything about it. Nobody here knows anything about what I just said. In fact, I went to Washington State, Washington City, and I asked them 3 questions. This is one of them. This is where you get it from. I said, I look for it. It took me 20 years to find it. That's how long I've been researching federal law, state law. And let me look and see what I got here. First violation. Pursuant to authority contained within the House document number 34, 85th Congress, first session, now this is in violation because it's a lie. It's admitted, we just had a duster hold us. I'm doing this because I'm not a very good speaker. This is in violation because
If you like, I'd be more than happy to visit with you about that after
Pardon?
our. I'm happy to visit with you about that issue after we're done, if you like,
Well,
if that's
that's,
easier for you.
there's about 14 acts of Congress that's all in violation because I have four court hearings. Huh? Oh, that's a good idea. Tonight or tomorrow.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to say something else.
I'm happy to visit with you after our gathering is done. We could take. Chuck?
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for singing that song for us. I think if Rosita was here, she'd probably answer with a song, but I'm not singing it, so I can't do that. But my question is, I'd like to know about what the name EchoHawk means, and maybe where it came from, but what it refers to. It sounds like a very strong name and interesting.
Kutawikutsu Tawaka'a. That's the hawk is speaking, and to us, the hawk is the messenger bird for the morning star. It's kind of like a warrior bird. And my great grandfather, he entered into the Pawnee Scout Battalion in after the tribe was removed to Oklahoma. We had our traditional enemies here that surrounded this homeland, alien mounted other tribes that came in after we had been there for centuries, I guess. But we were at one of them was the Sioux and Cheyenne nations, and we had been removed to Oklahoma here right after the Little Bighorn. We were there a couple years. The Little Bighorn took place in the northern plains, and the cavalry couldn't locate the Sioux and Cheyenne, so they sent our old commander down, Luther and Frank North, to Oklahoma to recruit 100 men, and my great-grandfather was one of them. And they went on a winter campaign, to locate, they were in search for a crazy horse. And along the way, they, in the Powder River country of Wyoming, they located the Northern Cheyenne village in the Bighorn Mountains there, and they attacked them, an all-day battle, and he took part in that. And afterwards, they captured the village and the horse herd, and all of the Pawnee scouts had name changes. Our custom, after taking things that they did took place during that battle, and so that's where he received that name. It was about kind of like Thanksgiving Day in the year 1876, a cold wintry day, but they gave him that name. It was an older family name apparently, but he had signed up. He enlisted under the name leader of the group, but he came home as EchoHawk from that campaign with it. That's where that name came from. Then when they allotted the Pawnee Reservation, that's how we got our current last names. And a lot of them, we have a lot of our tribal names translated into English, like the EchoHawk. And a lot of non-Indian names came in at that time, named after cavalry officers or BIA agents, boarding school teachers, and so forth. And when it was my grandfather's turn to receive his 120 acres, they they said, well, what's your name? And through interpreters, you know, he said, Kutawi Kutsu, to walk on. He said, I can't write that down. He said, what's it mean? He said, well, EchoHawk. He said, well, right across that Cimarron River is a real good guy. His last name is Price. Why don't you take his last name? And so he thought about it a while and said, I'll take EchoHawk. It's a warrior name, you know. So, but otherwise, my name could have been Walter Price, you know, today, you know. But anyway, that's interesting how our native people got our names. You know, we were. I think, is there any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
I've written 1,000, but I'll give you one that is not mine. I think it comes from your lands. Pashana he he na ho, Pashana he he na ho, Wakantanka he he nu, Hatohi misu mi yo, Pashana he he na he. Pashana he he na ho, Wankantanka he he nu, Hatohi misu mi yo.
Thank you. All right, very good. Thank you. Well, I think that takes care of our evening, and so with that, I'm going to proceed to the back of the room here, and Saul and I will be available to sign books, and we can also visit further if you like at that time. Thank you. Thank you very much.